What's up, math scholars and math haters? This is Mr. W. Today we're going to go over question 2 in the 5th grade math questions that North Carolina released this past school year. It tells us that Richard walked 15 and 74 hundredths of a mile, and James walked 12 and 98 hundredths of a mile, and it asks us how many more miles did Richard walk than James. Now, if you are used to reading this as 15.74 and 12.98, I'm saying it differently because that is how the Common Core curriculum connects fractions to decimals. I've actually seen it prove very useful. I know that Common Core can be very scary for a lot of people, but it's just a different way of thinking about math. It's a little more systematic, and it is a different way of thinking, which is why I'm going ahead and doing all these questions on this YouTube channel. So with that, in order to do really well in a question like this, when you see one, you'll need to know how to translate your word problem, and also how to subtract decimals. We're eventually going to get to a point where we have to subtract some decimals. So, I'm going to look through my problem, and the key word that I'm going to find first is more. More tells me that I'm going to be adding something, and since it says how many more miles did Richard walk than James, since my then is attached to James, I know that how far James walked plus some distance that I don't know is going to equal how far Richard walked. And this is what we're trying to find. How many more miles did Richard walk than James? This is just how to translate all of our words into a quick number sentence that I'm then going to plug some numbers into. So now it says that James walked 12.98 miles plus some unknown number that equals 15.74 miles, or sorry, it's a habit of mine to say 12.98 instead of 12 and 98 hundredths, and 15.74 instead of 15 and 74 hundredths. I will try to work on that as I keep going through these questions. But for now, I'm going to use my fact families and say that if I know that 12 and 98 hundredths plus something equals 15 and 74 hundredths, then I can kind of flip this around and say that 15 and 74 hundredths minus 12 and 98 hundredths equals this unknown number that I'm trying to find. And at this point, I just have a subtraction problem to do with some decimals, but we'll be okay. We're going to do this the same way that we've done a whole bunch of other subtraction problems that didn't have decimals. And I'm going to use my method, which is to go from left to right. So I'm going to start with 15 and 74 hundredths, and I'm just going to subtract 10. And I didn't write any numbers here because I want to make it clear I'm just hitting one digit at a time. So 110 minus 110 gives me 0 tenths, leaving me with 5 and 74 hundredths. Okay, so now I'm going to tackle my ones place, which is 2. 5 ones minus 2 ones gets me 3 ones. Still with my 74 hundredths, because I haven't touched my hundredths place, or tenths or hundredths place yet. And now I'm going to come over here and tackle my tenths place. Three and 74 hundredths minus 9 tenths. Now, this is where I run into a bit of a trick, because 7 hundredths doesn't go, or 9 hundredths doesn't go into 7 hundredths, so I'm going to need to rearrange my number a little bit. And I'm going to need to say, okay, instead of 3... Sorry, I said hundredths instead of tenths. We're working with the tenths place. My apologies. Instead of 3 and 7 tenths, I need to rearrange this and say that now I'm looking at 2 and 17 tenths. It's the same number. 3 and 7 tenths will give us the same value as 2 and 17 tenths. I've just rearranged it so that now I can do 17 tenths minus 9 tenths, which gets me 2.84, and this pen is running out of ink, unfortunately. Now all I need to do is figure out what this is minus my 8 hundredths, my last digit of the number that I need to subtract. And so now I'm just looking at 84 hundredths minus 8 hundredths. I can also think of this as 8 tenths and 4 hundredths and rearrange it as 7 tenths and 14 hundredths. Either way, it gets me 2 and 76 hundredths. I know that's a little off camera, so there we go. I end up with 2 and 76 hundredths. I compare it to my answer choices, and it matches choice A. So that's a good bit of work. But if, like I keep saying with these subtraction questions, if there's another way that you know how to subtract that you think is easier, absolutely go for it. I have absolutely no problem with different methods of solving problems, and in fact, I always say that you should have more than one method in your head in order to check your answer and check your work on a question like this.